shortly before we go live for the session.
Okay, thanks.
He says it is now live.
Welcome, everyone, to our last event of our CSCW and WIST Virtual Co-Location Day. It's really exciting to have you here, and I'm looking forward to an excellent talk today to wrap up our day. Before we begin, I want to say thanks to everyone on both the WIST and CSCW sides who helped bring our conferences together today. I hope you've enjoyed our plenary panel this morning. I know it was great. I thought it was great, and had a chance to interact and see what each other were doing in our different communities and think about how we might come together. I also wanted to remind everyone that we will be using Slido for our Q&A session at the end at the end of today's talk. Simply visit sly.do in a browser and enter the event code D681. The SVs should also be posting that link into your into the chat or on Clouder for CSCW and into the Discord chat for WIST. Once you're there, You can post your own questions or upvote existing questions that you think should be asked. It is my privilege to introduce Afua Bruce as today's keynote speaker. After getting a degree in computer engineering from Purdue, Afua started out as a software engineer at IBM. She went back to get her MBA at the University of Michigan, Go Blue. She then began working at the FBI, where she worked her way up to a role as the executive director of the White House's National Science and Technology Council. She then moved on to be director of engineering for the Public Interest Technology Program at New America. Earlier this year, she took a position as the chief program officer at DataKind, where she is at the forefront of the Data for Good movement. When she's not working, she enjoys cooking and baking, and she also knows how to throw an axe. Today, she will be speaking about the art of the possible, showcasing data science solutions for a better world. Welcome, Afua.
Great. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I appreciate the call out for my alma mater, the University of Michigan, as well as my axe throwing skills, which I will admit that I forgot was listed in my bio. So thank you. And I'm just getting my presentation ready to go. And there we go. So again, thank you so much for having me today. I know you've had a day full of conversation and events, and really appreciate the opportunity to just share my thoughts on what Data for Good means, what the possibilities are for Data for Good, broadly speaking. I know that CSCW exists to really explore what it means to design technology in ways that support collaborative work and activities. And this message, this mission really resonates with me. As you may have gathered from the previous jobs I've had, has sort of ended up in a place where looking at how we use technology to strengthen communities, to support communities, to empower people, and to really help to thoughtfully design our lives is a passion of mine. I started off as a software engineer at IBM, really focusing on the technical side, and felt a little bit of a disconnect between what I did in my day job and just my upbringing of always looking for how can I support others? How can I look at what's going on in my community? How can I use my skills to help further that action? So after grad school, I took a pivot, as some people do, by going to join the FBI, which was rather unexpected for me, but was really, in hindsight, such a good jumping off point for me to understand the ways that we need to make sure we're thoughtfully designing technology, we're thoughtfully using data to help govern different aspects of our lives. The consequences are real if you get something wrong, but also so empowering and so affirming if you get something right. I certainly like, the technical aspect, the social aspect, and even the theoretical aspect of how we can use technology, how we can use data, broadly speaking, and how that all comes together is really the intersection of both what I do in my day job as Chief Program Officer at DataKind, but also what I want to spend today talking to you about. So when it comes to technology, when it comes to data, when it comes to data science specifically, a quote we sometimes use at DataKind is the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. When you look at everything that you can do with data, that private sector companies specifically do with data, whether it's targeting what you see on Netflix, whether it's making sure that Facebook is maximizing the amount of time you're spending with the app, or advertisers are maximizing the amount of time you click on their ads and then you go and purchase something from them. The future is already here for what technology can do for us, what data science can do for us, but it's not evenly distributed. A lot of social sector organizations, including nonprofit organizations, NGOs, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and sometimes even parts of academia don't have access to that same power of data science being thoughtfully designed and thoughtfully used. So we have to ask ourselves then, how might we design data science solutions that serve the good of many? How might we go from maximizing profit, maximizing the number of minutes or hours or days you spend looking at a website, or maximizing the dollars you spend on on a game to how can we actually take data science and use it for the good of many, use it to benefit communities, use it to benefit societies, use it in the service of humanity. So I want to talk to you first by how we view that at DataKind. For those of you who aren't familiar with DataKind, DataKind is a nonprofit organization based in New York City, and we exist to leverage data science and machine learning in the service of humanity. We work by recruiting and managing a number of volunteers, a number of pro bono data scientist experts from across the world, and helping them and matching them with social sector organizations to identify problems, to identify data science specific problems, and then to build the data science specific solutions. We then make sure that we stick around to implement the solution and make sure that change process is completed. There's nothing more frustrating than starting a project or having a project started for you, sort of tossed over the fence, and people who worked on that leave prematurely. So at DataKind, we really do try to do from start to finish, from recruiting the talent, defining the problem, and implementing the solutions. And we talk at DataKind about what it takes to do a good data science for good problem. It's really working at the intersection of a number of factors, of 6 separate components that really comprise what it means to do data science for good projects well. So the first thing that you need is a problem statement. You truly have to start with what's wrong with the organization that you're working with, or even if there's something not wrong, what could actually be done to help move that organization forward. All solutions must be centered around the problem statement for that social sector organization, not just for a data scientist who's excited to show up and help another organization. The second is having access to data sets. To do data science, of course, you need access to data and making sure that data is possible, is acceptable, is accessible as well, has the correct information, is free from bias, or has ways that you can identify to mitigate against bias. It's crucial for having good projects. Then, of course, you need people to do things with the data sets to help solve the problem statement, right? And this is where data scientists come in. This is where people who know what they're doing, who are fluent in Python or R, I'm a Python girl myself, but whatever your tool is, they can take the data sets and manipulate them to help solve the problem and help inform decision making. Of course, social actors and subject matter expertise is critically important, because you can't design a solution, you can't fully define a problem statement, you can't design a solution if you don't have the subject matter expertise from the people in that social sector organization. If you don't understand the social actors who will interact with the tool that you're developing, who will interact with the output of the product that you're developing, if you don't have that knowledge intimately built into your design process and your development process, the data science for good solution won't end up being for good and may end up not working at all. And then, of course, funding makes the money go round. People in these different areas need to get paid in some ways. The organizations need to be able to function and need to continue going. The infrastructure that supports even a volunteer-run system is a non-zero cost, and so the funding piece is really crucial. And so as we think about what does it take for data science for good projects to work, it's really this intersection of these 6 components. If you lack any one of these components, you'll really be putting your projects at risk. If you lack multiple of these components, if you're not considering how you manage each of these components through the life cycle of your project, bad things can happen. Let me start by giving you some examples of what we've been up to at DataKind. DataKind in our history has done over 300 projects in the data for good space. And so I want to give you some examples of what it looks like to do data for good. This first project that I want to talk about is with a partner organization of ours called Global Witness. They are based in the Democratic Republic of Congo and work in the mining sector. Specifically, they exist to help identify illegal or unsanctioned mines due to health concerns or environmental concerns and environmental risk. Now, before we partnered with them, their practice was to identify these illegal mines by word of mouth or by land surveys. Both of these methods are extremely inefficient, expensive, and time consuming. So DataKind, we pulled together a volunteer team with experts who could help design a solution for this. The volunteer lead on this team was his full-time job was at Google Brain. And the way the team worked was we worked to identify publicly available satellite imagery and training data from the International Peace Information Service to build a detection model to detect potential irregular mines. Now, in the process, our solution did detect many mining areas with high but imperfect accuracy. And so one of the lessons learned from this project that I think is really relevant to all Data for Good projects is that while you can build a data science solution, you likely will not be able to completely remove humans from the process. And that's okay, because we want to make sure that that human knowledge, the social actors and the subject matter expertise referenced in the 6 components is still there. And so this solution that we built then, again, it is able to identify with high precision, about 80% precision, irregular mines, but it really serves up and empowers Global Witness to then deploy their investigative efforts, their investigative personnel in the right place, and to do that strategically, thereby reducing their overall cost and time for accomplishing their mission. Another project we worked on is with SIMPA Networks. SIMPA Networks provides pay-as-you-go solutions for solar energy, but it loses much. SIMPA, provides pay-as-you-go solutions for solar energy. And now SIMPA Networks used as input customer payment data to predict which new applicants were more likely to be a good fit for SIMPA's pay-as-you-go solar systems program. And so in doing that, and on looking at the information there, our volunteer team identified and discovered that customers that made 3 or fewer payments in the first 180 days had a 60% chance of having their system repossessed. This is a very high percentage and has a high cost, both for SIMPA, who is engaging in the cost-intensive process of acquiring new customers, of deploying the solar system that was there, but also is frustrating for people who had thought that they could acquire and hold on to that solar system that was involved and implemented in their house. And so our volunteer team then took it a step further and said, what can we do? How can we use data science to really help improve the decision-making capability of SIMPA Networks? How can we specifically predict repayment defaults for this organization? And so here we built a model to predict whether a potential customer is likely or unlikely to keep up with payments. And in this case, the analysis showed that SIMPA could reduce delayed payments by 1/3 while still continuing to retain 70% of their total customer pool. This then makes the cost of acquiring new customers and really providing the solar service to people lower for SIMPA. Also increases their ability to continue to give out loans and to continue to deliver this service because they're having their costs recouped. But it also means that the people who are accessing this solar system and getting that in their homes and in their environments are more likely to be able to continue to hold on and to really be able to count on that and adjust their lives accordingly. The third project that I want to talk about that DataKind has done is with a partner called Soil in Haiti. Now, you may or may not be familiar, but about 30% of the world, 36% of the world lacks access to a toilet. And many places this has significant health concerns. In Haiti, this lack of sanitation is actually credited for contributing to about 14,000 deaths due to cholera, or 14,000 cholera cases in 2017. And so Soil Haiti has provided thousands of container-based sanitation systems. It's a fancy way of saying a toilet in Haiti that collects the waste and then also transform the waste into agricultural grade compost. Because this is a technical panel, I wanted to show not just pictures of people and systems, but some technical details here. And so as we look at the Soil Haiti project that DataKind had the opportunity to work on, there were two main challenges that our partners, Soil Haiti, were facing. The first was mapping costs and logistics of transportation. And the second was they really had a lack of ease of using optimization tools. And so what we were able to do when we partnered our volunteer teams with Soil Haiti directly, we were able to leverage OpenStreetMap and Google OR to produce, ultimately to produce HTML maps with text instructions that helped guide the, essentially the delivery personnel for Soil Haiti. We were able to optimize the route that the delivery personnel were taking, which meant that their routes were more efficient and actually resulted in a double-digit decrease in fuel cost for Soil Haiti. So this decrease in time involved and in the cost of fuel really impacted the bottom line for Soil Haiti. And they were able to get more sanitation systems to people in a better amount of time. The process, of course, to do this work, to do this analysis that you see represented here is basic data science, right? Starting with data preparation and then going to the modeling and optimization phase, and then finally moving on to output and visualization. And working with our data scientist experts to go through that process, but also, and this is key across all projects where you're partnering the technical experts with non-technical experts, of really bringing your partners through the process and translating what the technology means in the non-technical context, so that the users of your technology can continue to use and adapt even once you move on, even after you've completed the project. So what's another thing that all of these problems have in common, that all of these data for good solutions have in common? Well, the key to this is the problem statement, right? The first component that I mentioned in our 6 components. And when we're designing solutions and we're designing data for good projects, we need to start with wicked problems. So when DataKind goes in, and when I've worked on other tech for good projects as well, when you go into a situation, you say, you know, I'm a technologist, I hear you want technology help, some version of that. It's not a, here is my toolkit, here is what I can bring. It's not a, oh, I read something about you on an article, in an article or a blog somewhere, and I know your problem. Or I've been a success in the tech field, and so now I'm here to help you, and I can tell you about your problems. But it's really starting with the partner organization, having the conversation. What keeps you up at night? What's that difficult problem? What's a difficult problem that's impossible to solve because of incomplete information or contradictory information or changing requirements or something that seems like an intractable problem? This is really where data science can often have an outsized impact, and why it's exciting to craft these projects, but to do so, again, really starting with defining what the problem is and making sure that that's your starting point, not just the toolkit that you want to bring to the solution. So I forgot that I had animation on here, my apologies. But again, as we look at different solutions that we have, as I mentioned before, the future is here now. And again, when we're translating the work from the private sector, and sometimes even from the academic sector into the social sector, it's really shifting from the types of problems that are about maximizing systems where people pay money, where people stay engaged on systems for the sake of being engaged in the system, to really what is the impact that we can have in society? What is the impact we can have on communities? How can we strengthen communities? How can we move society forward? So now that we've gone through and I've talked to you about what are the main components of a Data for Good project, what are some examples of projects that is Data for Good, what is the heart of it around that wicked problem? Where do we go from here? And there are a couple of options from here. So once you've figured out how to do individual projects, which is incredibly important and incredibly valuable to those specific organizations you work with, the next level question is, how do we go from working with one organization here, another organization there, a third organization there, to how can we, in some cases, take a look at an entire sector? And how can we imagine in the frontline health system sector, for example, where DataKind has some projects, how can we go from having individual impact to saying, look, there are multiple organizations in this sector that are dealing with a similar problem. Is there a way that we can develop some type of tool and then try that out with a number of organizations and make it widely available and scale? So now we've gone from having a big impact on just one problem, which again is important on its own, to actually moving an entire sector forward and moving entire sectors of social good work forward to have a better impact. So as I alluded to, this is something that DataKind is actively working on, and we've got some work going on in frontline health systems and also economic resilience. But to give you an example, with our frontline health systems work, we had a cohort of 4 projects. We had some partners in Nigeria and Kenya dealing with some frontline health systems there that worked not just in those locations, but across the African continent. And we partnered closely with those partners to have people on the ground from the area as part of our design team, as part of our development team, showing up at the weekly meetings and really experimenting with what are the challenges that organization A and B and C and D deal with. What are each of those wicked problems? And then from there, we were able to, after we completed those individual projects, say, you know what, 2 of these projects seem somewhat similar, or this one project seems really similar. And because of our research and the connections that we've made in this frontline health system space, we've actually realized that this project that we developed for this one organization actually may be applicable to these 2 or 3 other organizations. So now we can go and we can offer to work with those additional 2 or 3 organizations and say, hey, we have this tool that we think could be helpful based on what you said, based on what we've heard. Let's go ahead and build this experiment if it, again, still meets your wicked problem that you're trying to solve, and see where we can go. So we're now in the process of kicking off that second round of projects to really test how can you have solutions that scale within a sector. Because if you can fix those underlying problems around data integrity or anomaly detection or training information to train frontline health workers, you could have a bigger impact. And development done in 1 or 2 organizations can then impact multiple organizations, which can truly make a difference at the sector level. So I think, when we say, where do we go from here in the data for good space, as we continue to execute on individual projects, then being mindful of and thinking of how do we go to sector level change. The next thing that I think is really important to think about when you say, where do we go from here, is civic engagement. This is something I hear so often from especially folks in the US, but honestly, I think data journalism is another example of this. When you look at communities and communities taking agency and ownership of the data that's already collected by them or about them, sometimes by them, and how do you use that to actually strengthen in a practical way decision-making processes in community to help advocate for different decisions that are made, to help bring communities forward? You can actually, I think, use data science to help inform those processes. So how are you collecting the data? How are you analyzing that data around civic issues that really matter to you? There are, a couple of issues, specific groups that may come to mind. There's some around climate science that tie really closely into some citizen science efforts. There's some around data for Black lives, especially right now, and other social justice opportunities for having civic engagement around data science and data analysis. Broadly speaking, this way of using technology to really help inform and advance civic engagement is a generally growing field. And I think that it's important to make sure that we name this, because I also think this is another way to get multiple players into the data for good space. I think oftentimes, and some of you may relate to this, people feel that they need to choose between being a civic leader, a civic activist, and a technologist, that it's not possible to do both at the same time. Or perhaps you can have all of your civic activism conversations in one place, and then you have to toss it over and maybe let a technologist in another place. And the reality is that's just not how our world works anymore. And if that's what we're waiting for, we'll miss a lot of opportunity to have a lot of impact that really matters on people's lives, and again, for different movements and communities. The third area I want to talk about when we say, where do we go from here in doing data science for good, I think is in the policymaking realm. There have been several efforts, certainly within the US, to match projects that are done with data science to policymaking. So not just how do we have data-informed policymaking, which we absolutely should have. And definitely from my White House days, I could talk to you a bit about trying to shift the agencies to focusing more on data-informed decision-making. But really, what types of data analysis, what types of data science can you do that really serve up information to help inform the policy-making process and to help inform how policy is created and how policy is designed? We at DataKind actually did a project that combined nicely with my personal past, in that we had a DataKind project where we partnered with a project at New America where I previously worked. New America is a think tank that works on lots of policy. And we looked at mapping eviction data and mapping who is evicted and where they're evicted, generating heat maps. And then that information was actually turned out to be of interest to local community, local policymakers and local decision makers about where outreach should be done, where some intervention needs to be lifted. It's one example, but there are many others. And I think this is another idea of where we can continue to go when we say data science for good, what that means, what that looks like. So I've now talked about what the main components are. I've given you some examples of what data for good projects look like. I've talked about where I think we go from here once we figure out how to run individual projects. So you may be wondering, how do we start? What do you need to think of when we say, let's get started, right? Hopefully I've convinced you, or maybe at least piqued your interest in doing this type of work. And so how do you get started? Well, there are a few principles that are core to any data for good project, any technology for good project, I would say, more broadly speaking. So I want to go over those now so that as you start projects, as you start work, as you build these relationships and partnerships with social sector organizations, you're doing so in a thoughtful way that will reduce harm and really have a positive impact on the partner organizations that you're working with. So I am a huge XKCD fan. I don't know if anyone else out there is, but this comic here just really speaks to my soul when it comes to working with a lot of social sector organizations. Lots of organizations may say, my data is the worst data, my data is not organized. It's like everyone's data is bad. Everyone's data, there's something wrong with it. Let's just acknowledge it. But also acknowledge what that might mean for the level of work and the time it's going to take to implement a really thoughtful solution. So, I've talked a lot about, the importance of working with partners, but you may be saying, what's the role of a partner organization? What do I actually need to be looking at the social sector partner for? What do I as a data scientist, or what do I as a technical person need to build, need to bring to that situation, need to bring to that relationship? So I'll just recap those here. So really, when you're looking at what it is to be a good partner organization, this is, again, the social sector partner, you really want to make sure that you're partnering with someone who has local expertise and that real subject matter expertise for the issues that they're working on. They should be respected in their space. Within the organization, they need to have buy-in in what you're doing. It can't just be, I, Afua Bruce, have found someone at, let's say, the Red Cross, and I've talked to one person at the Red Cross, and we have had a conversation about what the Red Cross might need. It needs to be who's the leadership that's involved, who's going to have the power to turn on or to turn off the tool that you're developing, and who's going to be making decisions with the tool that you're developing. You need to have all of those stakeholders bought in. I alluded to earlier that, at DataKind, when we do projects, we really like, when possible, to have someone from our partner organization as part of the design team. They don't even necessarily have to be technical, but meeting regularly with the technical experts can help identify nuances in the design. With a project that we did earlier this year, we actually had a situation where we knew we were developing, an intake system on a phone, essentially an app that would be used on smartphones in Nigeria. And so the initial design was that when someone would enter information on the phone, it would be immediately uploaded. Because we had someone from the organization as part of our design team, they said, well, that would be good, except where these delivery people are, there isn't always reliable internet. So the immediate upload is not a good solution, actually. You instead need to have more of a push solution that's done when someone is back at the home base and can have access to that. Another point that I want to keep here, or the point I want to mention here when we think about partner roles, is thinking about scaling opportunities. So again, I mentioned for the where do we go from here, how do we look for sector level change? I think it's important there. But even if you're working with a single project with in a within a single organization, really thinking through what the end looks like for that project. If it's scaling, if it's just turning over ownership, really designing with the end in mind is incredibly important. And then on the data scientist side, and what the technical person brings to these partnerships, making sure that you are thinking through from the start what is ethical and equitable in what you're deciding. It should be the center of these conversations and the center of the work that you do. Next, it's incredibly important to meet your partner organizations where they are. I can't tell you the number of times where I've been brought into a situation, not a data kind, of course, but theoretically other organizations where, again, someone said, like, I am so smart with all of my technical knowledge. I'm going to build you this amazing solution. And they design it. And then no one can use it. No one can access it. No one at the organization can update it. That's not to say that every organization in the social sector doesn't know anything about technology. That's also not true. But making sure that you're designing appropriate solutions. Otherwise, you've just wasted a lot of people's time and money. When possible, I think it's also important for technical experts here to make sure that you're sharing out lessons so that other people who want to do this tech for good work can learn as well. So can you, share something into GitHub? Can you open source your information? Can you otherwise communicate that out? And again, on this side as well, thinking through your scaling options. Now, several people, say it's important to design with, not for, and that is absolutely true and crucial for creating, human-centered solutions in the tech for good space, data for good space specifically. And so just want to emphasize that here. And really, again, it's about understanding who the users are of your system and who is going to touch whatever tool you're designing. An example I often use, especially with my former national security, law enforcement experience with the FBI, is if you are designing some type of solution for a local police department, yes, the police officers are a user, but you should also be thinking about the people in the community who may be affected or otherwise touched by those systems that you're developing, and making sure that you're including them in some of the design and in some of the testing also. This is also true, actually, if you are doing policymaking or data science for policymaking and looking at how you're doing policymaking, making sure that you're inclusively bringing in different users, inclusively bringing in different humans into the process as you're designing that policymaking as well. And then finally, I just want to close with this quote from John Lewis, the passed away U.S. civil rights activist. Nothing can stop the power of a committed and determined people to make a difference in our society. And so as you, go through the rest of your conference, as you think about the conversations that you've heard today already, and again, you think about where are the intersections between the technical aspects, the social aspects, the theoretical aspects of the work that you're doing, you think about what it means to support communities, and you think about what it means to really develop the collaborative work and activities. Think about this as well. You have a lot of power, you know a lot, and you can make a true and really big, impactful difference in our society. You just harness those tools and work together with people well. And with that, I will go ahead and end my talk.
Thank you so much, Afua. That was a great talk. I'm going to put this screen back up quickly just to remind everyone that we do have a Slido for this event. And if you go and you enter in event number D681, that's a great place to ask questions and to upvote the questions that are already there. And so we'll be using that as our main way to ask questions. So I will do that so that we can be seen. But I know there are a couple of questions that have come up, and let me arrange my screen so that I can actually see them. And I guess one of the questions that's gotten upvoted and that's available, that's come up, is that at the beginning, you listed 6 components in your model for near the beginning for what needs to go together to do these kinds of projects. And I'm wondering, is there something that in that model, what do you see as the biggest challenges in that model for you and partner organizations?
Yeah, great question. So again, some of the 6 components that I mentioned were around the problem statement, the social actors, the subject matter expertise, the data scientists, the fundraising, and a 6th one that is equally as important. But I think what's really important is to just be explicit in naming them and explicit in tracking all of the different components. Obviously, people, especially when you're working with nonprofits, think about funding all the time. You're bringing data scientists, so of course someone's thinking about data science. Data sets was the 6th one, so you're thinking about that as well. But I think just being really intentional as you're designing a project, perhaps you have some type of scoping document, some type of project brief that you're writing, and just really tracking where are we on all of these areas and just being explicit about it. I don't know that I'd pick one piece that's more challenging than the other, but I think that it's more about being explicit with the different components and making sure that you're tracking and you're making progress on all of them.
Great. Another question that's gotten a lot of interest, and I think I know I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on, is do you have tips for junior researchers who are interested in finding work that has civic impact? And in particular, especially for those of us in academia, this isn't what our training emphasizes, or often our mentors have experience with. So how do we get involved, and especially for junior researchers?
Yeah, great question. So I think that, in identifying, research questions and research problems, making sure that you are looking for the actual problem, and again, the wicked problem. And so, shifting to this area, I think it's really important to really consider the interdisciplinary nature of work. And perhaps, if you're coming out of a computer science program, for example, if that's where you are, recognizing that it may require you to walk across campus and find the School of Public Policy, or walk across campus and find the School of Social Work as well, and really looking to build those types of relationships. I think what we really learn as we continue to do, Data for Good, specifically public interest technology is another phrase that's often used here, is that the interdisciplinary nature of the work is critical. And requires time and some different types of partnerships. I recognize that then gets into another, probably a whole nother set of questions, depending on your campus, about how the different schools and funding work on your campus. I'll set that aside for you to figure out. But I think really thinking through what those interdisciplinary relationships may look like for you is important.
I think following up on that, and with a question that's also about sort of our training and what we do, and that is, we have many students. This is again from someone anonymous question, but has gotten a lot of votes. We have many students taking project-based machine learning classes. Are there ways to structure these classes, perhaps connecting through DataKind, such that the smart, highly motivated, inexperienced students' final projects could actually generate social good, given the constraints and inexperience?
Yeah, I think there's certainly ways to do this. I'll admit that it is challenging just because, the time to get the 6 components in place is not trivial. The time to truly understand what that real problem statement is and to build the relationships that then any type of technical work can be done on top of is not trivial. And so I think in a general semester to semester term that is challenging. That said, I do think there are some programs that lend themselves more to this. I know Carnegie Mellon, for example, has some projects in this area. University of Chicago has a good program. I think Duke has some good programs. Georgia Tech has some good programs in this area as well. So there are a couple of models that you can look at. I think there are also a couple of organizations. DataKind doesn't do too much with having projects scoped well for students at the college level, but I think Women in Data Science out of Stanford University, I think they work more on things like that. So I think looking to some sample programs out of different academic institutions is a good starting place to think about.
Right. There are a couple, and I want to move, it's a little bit different question now, but getting back to, I think, something you talked about where sort of how to have the biggest positive impact. And I guess the question that's here is, what are the characteristics of projects where you have been able to have a greater positive impact versus those that have maybe been less successful? And the comment as well with this, thanks for the exciting talk.
Oh, well, thank you for the kind words. I'm glad you found the talk exciting. I think the key here is making sure that you are designing something that really works for that organization. And that's what it needs to come down to when you are having, you're doing any type of data for good project. I think that to have a bigger impact, if you can find an organization that is similar to other organizations, or the types of challenges are similar to other challenges, then that is something that once you solve a problem for one organization, you may be able to scale, or you may be able to apply in different situations. With the soil Haiti example that I gave, for example, that was that specific project was about optimizing a delivery route for sanitation systems. But if you take it down to its core, it's about optimizing delivery routes, those things that have, fixed time and resources and a number of places they're going. So you can imagine then that we could take that same solution, and in the time of coronavirus especially, or with any other health information or vaccines or medical delivery services that you need, you can apply that same delivery optimization route that we used for sanitation services. You can take that and then modify it and apply it to someone like an organization, Writers for Health, who we also work with, although not quite on this, but you can apply it to another situation where that fundamental problem is similar, even if what people are moving and how they're moving look differently. So I think looking at the types of organizations that you're selecting, are they solving similar challenges that other organizations have? It's one way to think about having a larger impact.
Great. There's a question here, and I'm sorry if I'm going to mispronounce your name, from Katie Alanka Giro. But one thing that has come up at this conference is the idea of critical refusal, or when, as technologists, we might decide or realize that technology is not the right tool for this problem. Has that come up at DataKind, or have you had experiences where that's happened?
Oh man, I love this question, because I think that we should always give people the opportunity to say no, and often at multiple times during the project. So first, I think it should be a general principle when we're talking tech for good broadly, when we're talking data science for good or machine learning for good. Technology may not be the right solution to the problem that is there. It could be the organization just needs a better process. It could be the organization just needs access to decision makers. It could be the organization just needs more money. And in those situations, all the technology in the world, all the data science in the world to help, come up with the best information, the best analysis, that organization has no way of getting information to the decision makers, isn't going to solve the problem. And so, yes, absolutely, technologists should be able to, critically refuse a project if that's not the right answer. On the flip side, social sector organizations should also have the right to do this. And just because you started talking with an organization or you want to build a partnership, don't consider it, a personal affront if they say, you know what, this isn't a good fit for us. There are a lot of reasons why an organization may not want to partner that have nothing to do with the merits of the technology that you're bringing. It could have everything to do with other factors that the organization is dealing with. Now, if you're proposing a ridiculous solution, then that is on you, and that's another issue. But in general, right, people shouldn't, both parties should feel like they can walk away. I'll also say that, for DataKind and for other organizations that use volunteers, I also find it important to periodically check in with volunteers and not assume that, just because someone volunteered a year ago, that they will still be wanting to volunteer 2 years from now, 5 years from now. Things happen in lives, circumstances change, people get burnt out, people change jobs, and making sure that as you're designing solutions, yes, you certainly want people to fulfill their commitments, but having some defined checkpoints where you can check in with people and, people can be given the option to, thank you very much for your service. We're now cordially parting. I think that's really important to build into project designs as well.
I actually want to take Chair's prerogative and follow up on something that you said there about sort of letting people step away after a period of time or checking in with the volunteers. And I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about how you think about sustainability of these things when you've got, a volunteer workforce and people who may be changing? How do you think about creating sustainable solutions?
Yeah, great question. And so when I think about creating sustainable solutions, it is recognizing that, one, there are a lot of people who want to do this work, and two, life happens. And so what that means is when we scope projects, we should scope them in sort of reasonable chunks of time. So at DataKind, we've got different projects, different project models that exist over different lengths of time. We have some that are scoped in the 6 to 9 month range. We have some that are scoped over a weekend. And so this lets people sort of proactively select into, I can commit to a weekend long data dive project. I can commit to a 9 month long data core project. And so having different ways to do that. And then this also gives a good opportunity to check in with the partner organization as well to say, we finished, let's say, a 9 month project. Was this interesting? Was it not interesting? Should we be looking at doing another 9 month project? Should we be looking at doing a weekend long project or something else? It gives, again, everyone the opportunity to reevaluate before moving on. So taking, the solution to that wicked problem that was identified and bringing it into chunks and moving from step to step to step, I think is one way to help mitigate through that.
Great. We have a question from Charlotte Lee that came in. What are the most important steps when getting folks to move from working on organizational level change to working on sector level change? How do we make that transition?
Yeah, in moving from organizational level change to sector level change, it really does begin with having some understanding of what the sector looks like. And so perhaps you've gotten this understanding from some of the research that you've done in your academic institution, back to a previous question in my, build some partnerships across departments. Maybe that's how you've started to understand what a broader sector looks like. Maybe it's in working with one organization, you've realized that that organization plays with many other organizations, but you do have to put in the work to sort of map out what a sector looks like and how multiple organizations play before you can move from organizational change to sector level change.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting question for us as we think about how to scale up the solutions that we can come up with in our own labs or whatever, but how do we move those out into the world and then bigger, make them, take them to a scale that we want to see them happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
A great question here from Nazanin Andalibi. What do you think are some of the problematic aspects of current data science for social good discourse, research, and practice? What would you like to see happen with these aspects moving forward?
Great question. So one of my biggest tension points with data science for good is what I started with, and then not everyone starts with what's the problem that we actually need to solve versus I'm a data scientist and I'm here to help. And so I think first and foremost that's there. I think broadly speaking, certainly within the U.S. to various degrees in other countries as well, our DataKind UK chapters been leading a lot of this work for us. We're having a lot more conversations about what does it mean to be ethical in designing solutions, and what does it mean to be ethical in creating, in applying data science and applying machine learning. So I think, processes where people don't proactively ask those questions or don't respond to issues when they're raised can be really challenging. I recognize that, it's a somewhat new area for translating from theory into practice. So we are learning, which again, I think is why it's important to make sure that people are responsive. But although it's, somewhat new to translate the theory into practice, researching the theory itself is not new. And I think that there isn't always the respect given for some of the research that has been done in the past and the research that has been written on what it means to combine technology and social sciences, for example, into one, and really looking at, SPS, for example, or a couple other disciplines where that type of research is ongoing, and starting from there and saying, how do we apply that into what we're doing today?
Great. I think that there was a lot of interest in that question. I think it's something that we've talked about also at the CSCW conference this week, is that question of how do we use data ethically and what does that mean and what are the places. There was a kind of a follow-up question here from Patrick Skiba that does DataKind ever refuse to work with partners based on their proposed use of data? Do you have an ethical check or a process for thinking about that, and how do you manage that at DataKind?
Sure. I think, again, there are many ways, or there are many reasons why, DataKind or any other sort of data for good or tech for good organization may not work with a partner organization. And so our process of developing these projects, we have a lot of back and forth and going through, is there a real problem there? Is it one where data science can actually make a difference? Is it one where the data is there and we can actually do something interesting with the data? And so just asking all of these types of questions as we're having those conversations. And, over the course of a couple of conversations, if it looks like there's not alignment, then we don't do the project, or maybe we scope a different project than had initially been talked about. Those are also those good options.
There are a couple of questions that have to do with, I think, the relationship between academics and the sort of work of academia and the data for good projects that you're talking about. And I'll highlight one here from Amy Bruckman. There's often a mismatch between the kinds of things that help solve real problems for partner organizations and the kinds of things that funding sources that academics rely on will fund. How do we address that gap?
Yeah, this is a great question, and one that unfortunately doesn't go away. It's not just academia. I think private sector, private sector has its own funding incentives and profit motives. NGOs have their own funding incentives and profit motives. So everyone has something associated with funding. So again, I think it's, how do you scope a project that's actually going to be useful to all parties? I think that's what it comes down to. And how do you do that in a way that you can continue to operate? And so being academics, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the grant writing process. And so you know how to write grants that resonate with people who are reviewing grants. Very true, and very applicable to doing data for good projects broadly.
Great. And kind of a follow-up question here from Herman Saxono. Are there things that researchers can bring to community partners beyond our technical expertise and grant funding? Many community organizations already have many duties to provide their services. Is the expertise and potential grants enough? Are there other things we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think expertise and potential grants are certainly a starting point, but I think there's oftentimes information asymmetry that exists in communities. And so what, as a researcher, what as an academic can you do to help mitigate that and to make sure that all players have access to the same information? What work can you do as an academic to translate and to synthesize some of, all of the knowledge you have and translate that down into really succinct bites that can then be used to really help inform communities? I think that's something else that academics can bring.
Great. I think maybe just one last question here as we're coming towards the end of the hour. And that question, it came in anonymously, but it's an important one. If we want to explore this topic more, how can we reach out to you or to someone at DataKind? What's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, of course. You can find both me and DataKind on Twitter. I'm Afua_Bruce on Twitter, and DataKind is just at DataKind. You can also email DataKind directly at contact@datakind.org. Our email is definitely on our website, and you should go there for it. So www.datakind.org. You'll also see there some of the locations of our different chapters if you wanted to be connected with a chapter specifically.
Great. This has been a wonderful talk. We didn't get to quite, there were a few other questions, but I encourage people to reach out Afua and to ask those questions and to follow up. I think this topic of how do we take the work that we're doing and make sure that we have impact, that we are working for good, that our work is ethical, and that it's serving the people who need it the most is such a key question. And I think the work that organizations like DataKind are doing is so important in this space. So I just want to extend our thanks again to you for this talk.
Great. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation today. So thank you all.
Yeah. And for those of you at CSCW, you know, this is our final session for our conference. And so before you go, we do have a few closing remarks that we wanted to share with you. Andrea?
Can you advance to the, I may be looking at the wrong screen, my apologies. Right, okay, yes. Right, so we usually like to sign off from CSCW with a roundup of stats about the event. This year, we can't really count how many cups of coffee were consumed, although the personal count between Matt and myself was around 20 cups, and mine were double shots of espresso. What we can do is show you where Clouderd data requests originated. This is a snapshot from yesterday, and give you a sense of the technical lift and behind the scenes efforts that went into planning and pulling off this event. So to support our final count of 953 attendees, by far the biggest CSCW ever, plus our guests from WIST who joined us today, we scheduled 323 events in Clouderd, coordinated 295 videos via Dropbox, configured 57 Zoom sessions, several of which had to be reconfigured on the fly, and handled around 300 help desk chat messages and emails, most of which were fielded by student volunteers. Across the organizing committee, we had an unusually high number of all hands meetings on Zoom, of course, so that we could craft the best conference experience possible. And our Slack channel hit 10,000 message limit right as the conference started, with around 2,500 or so messages since then. I was told that the SV Slack channel has had over 6,500 messages in just the last week, and our SVs have logged 1,125 volunteer hours, which is the equivalent of a person working constantly for 6 months. So I hope I speak for everyone involved when I say that your engagement and participation throughout the conference have made it all worthwhile.
Also, again, I said this at the beginning and I'll say it again now, CSCW wouldn't happen without our sponsors. And we again want to thank Facebook and Microsoft and the Underwood Institute and SIGCHI and the National Science Foundation for supporting this event and our community. I also want to take a moment to highlight what SIGCHI and the ACM do for conferences like this. When we decided in April that we would be virtual, there were so many unknowns. We'd already signed contracts, our budget was turned upside down, and we frankly didn't know if anyone would show up for a virtual CSCW. In short, we simply didn't know if we could afford to have CSCW this year. SIGCHI and ACM had our back. They supported our decision, encouraged us to move forward, negotiated us out of cancellation fees, and assured us that if we had a budget shortfall, they would cover us. We want to send a special thanks to all of those at SIGCHI and ACM who work behind the scenes to support our community. And also let you know a little bit about when you pay those membership dues for ACM, these are the kind of things that you're supporting. We also want to thank again the people who've worked so hard and under such strange circumstances to make this conference possible. Our plan from the beginning was that CSCW 2020 would be co-located with WIST. Andrea and I had the privilege of getting to know Karen and Shamsi as we worked together to choose cities and hotels and plan how our conferences would fit together, and then throw all of that away and start over from the beginning to plan a virtual co-location. We also really have to thank our organizing committee. They had no idea what they agreed to or what they were getting themselves into when they agreed to serve this year. But they took all of our changes in stride and produced an amazing conference. Usually everyone would see our conference managers, John and Joanne Laudelaire, walking the halls of our conference hotel, making sure everything is going smoothly. And while this year they may not have been quite as visible, they were even more instrumental in making sure that all of the pieces fit together. And also, speaking of behind the scenes, we send our thanks to the Clowder team who've worked tirelessly to deal with our long list of feature requests and bug reports and everything else that we've done to their platform. Of course, many thanks to our cohort of student volunteers who make it all happen on the ground. You can see them here. And as Andrea said, it's a huge amount of labor that they bring and to make this conference possible. Thanks also to everyone who was instrumental in creating the program, our editors, our ACs, our reviewers, our authors, our speakers, and session chairs. And of course, CSCW is a community, and we thank all of you for showing up. We also thank you in advance for sharing your feedback on a post-event survey that should be arriving in your email in a couple of days, as I'm sure everyone here can appreciate. We're especially keen to evaluate the virtual conference experience. And with that, we hand the reins over to Louis Cholfi and Jeremy Bernholtz, who will lead us bravely into 2021.
All right, thank you so much, Matt. I'm Jeremy Bernholtz from Northwestern.
And I'm Regina Cholfi from University College Cork.
And we are the general co-chairs of CSCW 21. And we know that you're all inspired by this wonderful keynote and all of the intellectual and social opportunities that have been provided in 2020. So thank you all again for that. And we know that the top question on your mind is, can we do this again? And do we really have to wait a whole year? And the answer is yes, we can do this again. You do have to wait a whole year, actually a little bit more, but very little bit, because you can mark your calendars. CSCW 21 will be October 23rd to October 27th, 2021. And when Louis and I see you again, and we're welcoming you to CSCW next year, you will be in an amazing venue. Look around you right now, that could be it. If you're planning to relocate before then, that could be it. Or really wherever in the world you are, you will be able to attend CSCW, because that's right, we will be having another virtual conference in which we look forward to your participation. And Louis is now going to tell you about the amazing people who are going to help us make that happen and ways that you can get involved.
Yes, so check out our website, which is alive and work in progress. One of the first things that are going to be added is our new logo, which has been voted kindly by all of you attendees of CSCW 2020. So thanks for that. So watch out for a overhaul of the website with more information about everything, including final dates and all of that. But we've already assembled an absolutely amazing team on the organizing committee. We have a number of different venues, and a few more people will join us as we finalize arrangements for next year. And so watch out for communication from our communications chairs on open calls for submitting proposals to all these different venues. And of course, we have the papers process. The first quarterly deadline that is covered by the 2021 conference is passed. So thanks for everybody who has submitted at that deadline. And of course, there will be more. Get your papers ready and please submit to the conference. But very, very important. There's a lot to learn from running a virtual conference, as we all know. And of course, Matt and Andrea have done absolutely amazing work this year. We're keen to learn from this experience. So obviously, we've been taking notes and hearing comments and suggestions about this year. But if you feel like you want to reach out, share your views with us and your suggestions, please do. We're here and very, very interested to hear your views. So email us at chairs2021@cscw.acm.org. And we're all ears, and we really want to make a great second fully virtual CSCW from your room. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, and we will see you next year. Take care.